Welcome back to the channel. I've been doing some GPU testing and trying to look at some of the more current games in my repertoire, and I know it's very difficult to get 50 series cards right now, and honestly, with the prices that are through the roof, it's driven the previous 40 generation cards quite high as well. If you were waiting to upgrade, you're finding it very difficult. And you might still have a 3080 or a 3090 or 30 series card in general, and wondering what can you expect if you want to play Monster Hunter Wilds? Can you play it with a 3090? Well, let's find out not only what you can accomplish with it, but let's look at what settings you think you would be able to run reasonably well. So Monster Hunter Wilds recommended system requirements and a GTX 2060 with 8 gig of VRAM or an RX 6600 with 8 gig of VRAM. But the question is, can you run Monster Hunter Wilds with the flagship 30 series card, the 3090? Yes. Yes, you can. Cat's out of the bag. Great. Thanks for the video. See you guys later. Now let's talk about what your settings might look like if you choose a 3090 to play this particular game. Whenever I see a content creator, and there's a lot of good ones out there that do side-by-side comparisons, and here's what you can expect in different settings, and amazing information. But what I want to know is, what does my system have to be in order to get reasonable gameplay? And does the configuration of that system matter? So these are the 5 systems I've used to do a lot of different testing. I spent a lot of time in in benchmarks and trying to figure out what would be the reasonable settings. And that's what I want to report to you today. The system 1 through 5. First is the Test Bench V2 that's been reported on my channel. That has been updated with an 14900 KF with 32 gig of memory. System 2 is the Penthouse system, which was an i9 14900K with 32 gig of memory. It's a little faster transfer rate, but it's still 32 gig of memory. And I thought, well, I need a K that does the amount of RAM matter. So I spent money and more money and increased from 32 to 64. So now we've got a K with 32, a K with 64 gig, and now we've moved into the KSs with 64 gig in the sim rig, or a KS in my office rig, the best system that I have right now, at 96 gig of memory. I've outlined how I've got my BIOS settings and my thermals set up with my vidlock and undervolt, and the coolers that I use in order to keep everything nice and cool in the 14th gen systems, which I really believe are still wonderful systems to put together. So in terms of looking at frame rates, and the 3090 went into all of these systems, what is reasonable settings for this particular game? So a couple guidelines before we get into the details here is that it was using the in-game benchmark to determine your frame rates. And prior to any frame generation, the base frame rate, in my opinion, should be 60 frames per second minimum. Honestly, I believe that for this type of active game, first-person shoot 'em, that type of interactive, you can't deal with a lot of lag. You need 80 frames per second or larger. I've heard content creators say 100 or bust. I don't know that you necessarily need that kind of frame rate, but I will say that you need to at least have 80. And one of the reasons I account for this is because this particular benchmark has a video section in the front and on the back end of it, and it kind of pads your frame rate a little bit. When you get into the more active play portion of the game, get down into dealing with monsters, running, getting into the town situations, walking through, you're going to drop 10 to 15 frames per second just in that section of the benchmark. So you need at least 80 base frame rate in order to have over 60-ish frames per second in the higher demanding sections of the game. Okay, and again, acceptable frame rates are subjective, so this at least put you in the good ballpark and get you set in the right direction if you want to use a 3090 with Monster Hunter Wilds. So when you're looking at 1080p resolution, you've got 4 systems that I focused on here. And I used the different systems because I actually thought that I'd be able to change my settings and resolution and say, you really need 64 gig instead of 32. You really need a faster CPU than the slower CPU. The differences were so minimal that it really didn't change the testing result. In terms of all of these systems, 1080p was high settings and DLSS balanced. No frame generation or ray tracing here with the 30 series. Now I know that you can mod these things and add and tweak but I'm talking for the standard user buying the game, plugging it in their system, using a 3090 that they have. This is what you can expect to get started. And so I tested other settings as well. So I tried to go to Ultra and some other high settings and move from DLSS balance to DLSS quality. And you can see that the frame rates drop, but it might be reasonable if you want to play around with higher settings. Ultra with quality settings, it drops you to 84. Now, remember, you're going to also have that 10 to 15 frame per second dip in the middle, which is ultimately why I didn't say that these are the settings you should use. I've ran this test a lot. This is a very long benchmark too. It's too long. But anyway, that's why I stuck to average FPSs in the 90s, because the dips in the middle would still be reasonable. It was still smooth. It would seem to be enjoyable to play. You might have some blips and some ghosting here once you try to increase your settings a little bit. But try them out, see what you think. But I think 1080p is a good option in a 3090. But I think you can get away with 1440p. So when you go up to 1440p, you will make your settings in the high settings and use DLSS balanced again. And that still keeps you in the 80 frame per second range. And that was reasonable gameplay. It looked really nice. It was smooth enough, and you could enjoy your gameplay there. So I think, honestly, and I might be my bias is showing through a little bit. I like 1440 resolution, and I do have the option for 4K, but again, I don't have a lot of good cards that can take advantage of 4K. I've got a lot of 30 series cards. I got a 5080 and then a bunch of 30 series cards. 1440p is likely your best option in those situations. And when you want to get into 4K, you do have to drop too low. I tried other settings to be tested. I tried to jump up to medium, and you can see the frames per second were 65, 69. Trying to get your DLSS up to balanced. It may not be worth it to try that. I mean, you try your settings, but you might not enjoy it as well. Drop it to low settings might give you the best possible option. But again, if you would be into that, if you really just needed to run 4K because you wanted to run 4K, that's okay. I think you probably should stick with your 1440p or even 1080 for your best combination of frame rate and your graphic settings. But you don't need to pay these exorbitant prices to think that you need to jump for frame rates to get into the 50 series cards. You can still enjoy this game with a 3090. So enjoy. God bless.